The Guangjiang market smelled of life and survival. For Zola, the two were indistinguishable. The air was a thick tapestry woven from the sharp funk of fermenting kimchi, the nutty warmth of toasted sesame oil, the briny promise of seafood, and the sweet, cloying scent of mung bean pancakes frying in shallow pools of oil. It was a smell that clung to her clothes, her hair, the very pores of her skin. To the tourists, it was atmosphere. To the vendors, it was commerce. For Zola, standing behind a refrigerated glass case of neatly arranged banchan, it was the smell of another day closer to the $200,000 she needed to keep her grandmother alive. Her skin, the color of rich dark soil after a rain, seemed to absorb the market's fluorescent glare. Her hair was a crown of tight, intricate braids, a stark contrast to the simple, functional gray apron she wore over a black t-shirt and pants, the uniform of the invisible. It was a costume of subservience, designed to blend in, to not draw the eye. But her hands were a different story. Long, elegant fingers, nails kept short and clean, moved with an economy and precision that was almost hypnotic. They arranged pickled radish into perfect rows, wiped a microscopic smudge from the glass with a single fluid motion, and handled money with a brisk, impersonal competence. They were the hands of a surgeon or a watchmaker, incongruous in this world of chopped cabbage and chili paste. And then there were her eyes, dark, intelligent, and perpetually watchful. They missed nothing. The way Mrs. Kim, 2 stalls down, favored her left hip, the nervous tick in their own stall's owner, Mr. Choi, when his rent was due, the subtle shift in the crowd's density that signaled the arrival of someone important. Her stillness was her shield, a deliberate, controlled state that she had perfected over 2 years of working here. Survival was a calculus of endurance, and Zola was a master of the equation. Every portion of spicy cucumber salad she sold was $1. Every container of braised lotus root, $2. Each transaction was a tiny, insignificant drop in an impossibly large bucket. The number was a brand on her soul, $200,000. The cost of an experimental pancreatic cancer treatment in a sterile, faraway American hospital. The cost of her grandmother's laughter, of the stories she told of growing up in Alabama, of the hands that had raised Zola when she had no one else. The debt was the reason she was here, in Seoul, a city that saw her as a curiosity at best and an intrusion at worst. It was the reason she tolerated the daily slights, the whispered comments, the overt stares. Weakness was a luxury she could not afford. Sacrifice was her reality. Her past was a ghost that walked beside her, a scholarship to a prestigious university for international studies, a focus on East Asian politics, a life that was supposed to be lived in embassies and think tanks. That life had evaporated with a single phone call, the diagnosis a guillotine that had severed her future from her present. The ghost of that life was a bitter companion, but there was an older, more useful ghost as well. The ghost of Uncle Kim, the gruff, low-level Busan crime boss who had taken in a lost, orphaned black American girl years ago after her parents' diplomatic car went off a cliff on a rain-slicked Korean road. He had been a friend of her father's, a debt of honor repaid by raising the child left behind. He hadn't taught her softness. He had taught her his world. He'd taught her how to watch, how to listen, how to fight, how to disappear. He'd taught her the guttural, slang-filled Korean of the Busan docks, a language as far from the polished Seoul dialect as one could get. He had taught her that survival wasn't about being the strongest. It was about being the one who saw the knife before it was drawn. Zola, si, mister. Choi, the stall's owner, scurried over, his face gleaming with a thin sheen of sweat. He was a man perpetually on the verge of a panic attack, his body a knot of trembling anxiety. He's coming, the landlord's son, Park Jin-soo. Make sure everything is perfect. No, more than perfect, divine. He was complaining about the fish stall yesterday, said the smell was unrefined. A ripple of fear, tangible as a cold draft, flowed through the adjacent stalls. Voices lowered, hands moved a little faster, a little more nervously. Park Jin-soo was not just the owner's son. He was a petty tyrant who wielded his inherited power like a club. He delighted in finding fault, in the public performance of his own importance. Zola simply nodded, her expression placid. Yes, Mr. Choi. She turned back to her work, her movements unchanged, but her senses sharpened. She was a seismograph, and Park Jin-soo was a coming tremor. In the corner of her eye, she saw the old woman at the dried fish stall, a woman with a face like a weathered map, meet her gaze. The woman gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod. It was a small gesture of solidarity, a shared acknowledgement of the coming storm. Zola had once helped her translate a complicated customs form for a shipment of premium yellow croaker, a small kindness that had forged a silent bond. The old woman was a fixture, an elder who saw more than most. Suddenly, a new sound cut through the market's familiar hum. It was a child's cry, not the petulant whine of a spoiled toddler, but the high, panicked wail of genuine distress. Zola's head lifted. A few people glanced at the source of the noise. A small boy, no older than 5, standing alone near the bustling central intersection of the market. He was impeccably dressed in a small, stylish peacoat and dark jeans, looking utterly lost. His face was red, tears tracking clean paths through the market grime that had somehow found his cheeks. People looked, and then they looked away. It wasn't their problem. They had fish to sell, customers to serve, rent to pay. The boy's cries grew more desperate. He spun in a slow circle, his small hands fisted, his world having shrunk to a terrifying, lonely point. Zola watched for 3 seconds. 3 seconds where she calculated the risk of leaving the stall, the probability of Mr. Choi's anger, the potential for drawing unwanted attention. 3 seconds where she saw not an inconvenience, but a small, terrified human being. The calculus of survival was momentarily replaced by the simple, undeniable math of compassion. She wiped her hands on her apron. "Mr. Choi, I will be right back." Before he could protest, she was moving. She didn't run, but wove through the throng with a liquid grace, a ghost in her gray apron. She knelt in front of the boy, creating a small, safe bubble in the chaotic river of legs and shopping bags. "Hey," she said softly, her voice a low, calming murmur. Her English was unaccented, gentle. "Are you lost?" The boy flinched, his tear-filled eyes wide with fear and confusion. He didn't understand. He shrank back, his crying hitching into ragged sobs. Zola's expression softened. Of course. She switched to the gentle, formal Korean taught in schools. "It's okay. I'm not going to hurt you. Did you lose your mama?" He shook his head, fresh tears spilling. "Appa," he whispered, the word for dad, a tiny broken thing. "Appa," she repeated, nodding. "Okay, we'll find your Appa. But first, we need you to breathe. Can you do that with me?" The boy just kept crying, lost in his panic. Zola searched for a tool, something to anchor him. And then, from the deepest recesses of her memory, a gift from Uncle Kim surfaced. He had been a monster to his enemies, but with her, in the quiet moments, he had sometimes shown a different side. He'd taught her the songs his own mother had sung to him in a fishing village outside Busan. She began to hum, a low, ancient melody. Then, words came, her voice soft as velvet, the dialect thick and comforting, completely at odds with her American face. It was a lullaby about the sea, about a little boat coming home to a safe harbor. Jajang, uri agi. Sleep, sleep, our baby. The boy's sobs faltered, his head tilted. The melody was a strange and familiar key unlocking his terror. He stared at her, this tall, dark-skinned woman with the kind eyes, singing a song he felt he knew in his bones. He took a shaky breath and leaned forward, his small hand tentatively reaching out and grabbing a fold of her apron. He held on like it was a lifeline. She kept singing, her voice a quiet anchor in the noisy market, one hand resting gently on his back. She didn't see the way the market seemed to part. She didn't notice the sudden, deeper silence that was falling around them, a silence that cut through the noise of commerce. A man was moving through the crowd, or rather, the crowd was moving around him, a school of fish instinctively avoiding a shark. He wasn't large, but his presence had a physical weight. He was flanked by 2 other men, both silent, both with the same predatory stillness. The room's reaction was his announcement. He wore a dark, impeccably tailored suit that probably cost more than Zola's grandmother's first round of treatment. On his wrist was a watch, a simple, elegant Patek Philippe, whose value could have solved all her problems in an instant. His black hair was expertly cut, and his face was a mask of cold, controlled fury. His eyes, the last thing one noticed, were chips of obsidian. They swept the market, dissecting it. looking for the one precious thing he had lost. Then he saw them, his son, clutching the apron of a black woman who was kneeling on the filthy market floor. His entire body went rigid, the cold fury in his eyes intensified, transforming into something infinitely more dangerous. He started forward, his pace deliberate, each step a hammer blow, and then he heard it. Padoga chinda, baram I bunda. The waves are crashing, the wind is blowing. Kwon Ji-hoon stopped. He stood perfectly still, about 10 feet away. The two men behind him froze, mirroring his stillness. The lullaby washed over him. It wasn't just any lullaby. It was the lullaby. The one his grandmother, a woman born and raised in a tiny village near Busan, had sung to him. A song he hadn't heard in 30 years. A song he had tried and failed to remember to sing to his own son. The fury in his eyes vanished, replaced by a profound, bottomless shock. He couldn't move. He couldn't speak. He could only listen as this foreign woman sang a piece of his soul back to him in a dialect so authentic it hurt. The market, the noise, his missing son's terror, it all faded away. There was only the song and the impossible woman singing it. The lullaby ended. The boy, Min-jun, was quiet now, his breathing even, his small hand still clenched in her apron. Zola looked up from the child's face, and her eyes met Kwon Ji-hoon's. She saw the shock, the raw emotion he quickly tried to mask behind a veneer of cold authority. She didn't know who he was, but she knew power when she saw it. This was not a tremor, this was the earthquake. He took a step forward, his composure regained, but the echo of that shock still lingered in the rigid set of his shoulders. Min-jun. His voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of absolute command. The boy turned, his face lighting up. "Appa!" He let go of Zola's apron and ran into his father's arms. Ji-hoon swept his son up, his hand stroking the boy's hair, his eyes never leaving Zola. He looked from her kneeling form on the ground to his son's safe embrace. For a long, charged moment, he said nothing. He simply watched her, his gaze intense, analytical, unreadable. Then he gave a stiff, formal bow, an incongruous gesture of respect. "Thank you," he said, the words clipped. He turned without another word and strode away, his men falling in behind him, the crowd parting once more. Zola remained kneeling on the floor for a moment, the market's noise rushing back in to fill the void. She felt a chill that had nothing to do with the concrete floor. She had been seen, not as a vendor, not as a foreigner, but as something else, something inexplicable. And in this world, being inexplicable was dangerous. She rose, brushed off her knees, and walked back to the stall. Mr. Choi was practically vibrating with a new kind of anxiety. "Do you know who that was?" he hissed, his eyes wide. Zola shook her head, resuming her post behind the glass. "That was Kwon Ji-hoon," Mr. Choi whispered, as if the name itself could shatter glass. "He owns this market. Not the building, he owns the market, the trucks, the supply lines, the security, everything. And that was his son." Zola said nothing. She just picked up her cloth and began to wipe down the already spotless counter. But her hands, for the first time all day, were not perfectly steady. The ghost of Uncle Kim whispered in her ear, "You just sang a lullaby for a viper's cub. The viper is now watching the nest." The tremor had passed. The earthquake was coming. It arrived an hour later in the form of Park Jin-soo. He swaggered through the aisle, flanked by two sycophantic cronies, his chest puffed out. He was a man playing a role, his performance of power loud and brittle. He'd clearly been drinking, the sour smell of soju tainting the air around him. He stopped directly in front of Zola's stall. Well, his voice was a theatrical drawl, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Look what we have here, the market's pet project." Mr. Choi began to bow frantically. "Mr. Park, welcome. Is everything to your satisfaction?" Park Jin-soo ignored him completely, his eyes fixed on Zola. A cruel smirk played on his lips. He leaned against the counter, his gaze dripping with contempt. "I heard you caused quite a scene earlier, singing to the boss's kid. Think that makes you special?" Zola kept her face a neutral mask, her eyes focused on a point just past his shoulder. "I was helping a lost child, sir." Her voice was deferential, quiet. The "sir" seemed to enrage him. "Sir," he laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "Don't call me that. You don't have the right. He switched to Korean, his words fast and slurring, deliberately meant to exclude and demean her. Look at this black thing, this Hyukin, pretending she has manners. She probably learned that one word and thinks it makes her civilized. His cronies snickered. Zola's expression did not change. Her stillness was absolute. Around them, the market held its breath. This was the performance, and she was the unwilling star. "I'm talking to you," he said, his voice rising. He hated being ignored. He saw a small pot of beef jjigae, bubbling hot, waiting to be portioned for a customer. An idea, ugly and spontaneous, lit up his eyes. "You know," he said, picking up the hot earthenware pot, the fabric of his sleeve protecting his hand. "My father always said our food should be served with warmth. Hospitality is key." He held the pot over the counter, dangerously close to Zola's arm, which was resting on the countertop. The steam rose, carrying the spicy scent of gochujang and boiling beef. "Are you hospitable, girl?" he sneered. The world narrowed to the space of 3 seconds. 3 seconds where Zola saw the deliberate tilt of his wrist. 3 seconds where she weighed the cost of pulling her arm back, an act of defiance against the cost of letting it happen. The job, the money, her grandmother's face. 3 seconds where she chose survival. She chose endurance. She did not move. With a final contemptuous smirk, Park Jin-soo tripped, jostling the pot. A stream of boiling hot stew cascaded over the side, splashing directly onto Zola's forearm. Pain, white-hot and immediate, shot up her arm. It was a searing electric shock. Her entire body screamed to recoil, to cry out, to show the agony. But she didn't. She remained perfectly still, her jaw tight, her eyes fixed on that point in the distance. A single tear, born of pure pain, welled in her right eye, but it did not fall. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the silence of a public execution. The sizzling sound of the hot liquid on her skin was sickeningly loud. Park Jin-soo laughed. It was a release of tension, a declaration of victory. "Clumsy me," he said, setting the pot down with a clatter. "You should be more careful, standing so close." He looked at her arm, at the angry red welt already beginning to form. "You should put some ice on that, if you can even see the burn on skin that dark." He turned to leave, basking in the fear and submission of the onlookers. The middle manager, Mr. Choi, was frozen, his face the color of ash. The other vendors stared at the floor. No one moved. No one spoke. This was the wound, the humiliation, the moment designed to break her. And in the frozen silence, as the fire crawled up her arm, Zola made a new calculation. The equation of survival had been solved incorrectly. Endurance was not victory. It was merely delayed defeat. Dignity, she realized, was also a form of survival. The ghost of Uncle Kim spoke again, his voice cold as a Busan winter. "A dog that does not bite back will be kicked to death." She straightened her spine. It was a small movement, but it felt monumental. It was a shift in the tectonic plates of her soul. She slowly, deliberately, turned her head and looked directly at Park Jin-soo. Her eyes were no longer a neutral mask. The placid surface was gone, replaced by something ancient and cold as deep space. Park Jin-soo felt her gaze on his back. He paused, annoyed that she wasn't broken. He turned back, a sneer ready on his lips. "Don't you have anything to say, you dumb animal?" Zola said nothing for 3 seconds. 3 seconds where she let the pain focus her. 3 seconds where she shed the skin of the deferential waitress. 3 seconds where she became her foster father's daughter. Then she spoke. Her voice was not loud. It was deadly quiet, but it cut through the silence like a shard of glass. The Korean that came from her lips was not the polite, soul standard she had used before. It was the rough, gravelly, slang-ridden dialect of the Busan docks. "Ya, psyche ya," she began, using a term of insult so low, so utterly dismissive, that Park Jin-soo physically recoiled as if struck. The shock on his face was profound. "A man who scalds a woman to feel powerful is no man," she continued, her Busan Satori flawless, each word a perfectly weighted stone. "He is a child throwing a tantrum, and a clumsy one at that. You spilled more on your own overpriced shoes than you did on my arm." She glanced down at the splash of red stew on his pristine designer loafers. The color drained from Park Jin-soo's face. His jaw worked, but no sound came out. His cronies were frozen, their snide grins wiped clean. The entire market was a tableau of disbelief. A collective, silent gasp seemed to suck the air from the space. Mr. Choi looked like he might actually faint. The old woman from the fish stall, however, had a slow, grim smile spreading across her weathered face. This wasn't just a response. It was a counterattack, delivered in a language he understood on a cellular level. She hadn't just spoken Korean. She had spoken his world's hidden language of power and disrespect, and she had mastered it. How? He stammered, his bravado shattered, revealing the frightened, inadequate boy beneath. He scrambled to reassert control. Security! Security! Get this thing out of here! She's fired! You're all fired! But no one moved, because everyone was now looking past him. Kwon Ji-hoon stood there. He had been watching from the shadows of a pillar, a silent observer. He had seen the whole thing, the taunting, the spill, the pain Zola had refused to show, and the reversal. His face was devoid of all emotion, which made it terrifying. It was the calm at the center of a hurricane. He moved forward, his steps unhurried. He didn't look at Park Jin-soo. He walked directly to the counter and looked at Zola's arm. The burn was an ugly, blistering red against her dark skin. Without looking up, he spoke to one of his men, his voice a low command. "Get the first aid kit, the good one, from my car." The man vanished instantly. Ji-hoon finally lifted his eyes to Zola's. The unreadable shock from before was back, now mingled with a cold, clear assessment. He saw the pain she was holding back. He saw the steel behind her eyes. He saw the woman who had sung his grandmother's lullaby. He addressed her in formal, respectful Korean. "Are you all right, Zolasi?" The use of her name, the honorific, the polite question, it was a seismic shift in the market's hierarchy. He was conferring status. He was taking her side. "I will be," Zola replied, her voice still quiet, but the Busan accent was gone, replaced by a neutral, clear Korean. She was a chameleon, adapting her colors to the landscape. Only then did Ji-hoon turn his gaze to Park Jin-soo. The sheer glacial contempt in that look made the spoiled air shrink. "My market," Ji-hoon said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, a sound more menacing than any shout, "is a place of business, not your personal playground. You have disrupted my business." He let the words hang in the air, a death sentence in 5 words. She insulted me," Park Jin-soo blustered, gesturing at Zola. Ji-hoon's eyes flickered to Zola, then back to Park. "From what I saw," he said, his voice cold as a morgue slab, "she merely offered an accurate character assessment. You are clumsy, and you have ruined a perfectly good pair of shoes." He dismissed him with a flick of his eyes. "Go home, Jin-soo, before you embarrass your father any further." Utterly broken, his public humiliation complete and absolute, Park Jin-soo stumbled away, his cronies scrambling after him like rats deserting a sinking ship. The silence returned, but this time it was different. It was the silence of awe. The man returned with a serious-looking black medical kit. Ji-hoon took it, opened it on the counter, and began to expertly treat Zola's burn himself. His touch was impersonal, efficient, yet surprisingly gentle as he applied a cooling salve and a sterile bandage. The proximity was electric, a space charged with unspoken things. "You have many surprises, Zolasi," he said, his eyes on his work. "So do you, Kwon-si," she replied, matching his formal tone. He finished wrapping the bandage. "My office, in 5 minutes." It wasn't a request. He closed the kit, turned, and left. Zola stood behind the counter, her arm throbbing with a dull, manageable fire. The pain was nothing compared to the roaring blaze of what had just happened. She had stepped off a cliff. She didn't know if she would fly or fall. She looked at Mr. Choi, who was staring at her as if she had grown a second head. She untied her gray apron, folded it neatly, and placed it on the counter. "I believe I am on a break," she said, her voice calm and even. Then she walked toward the back offices, her posture straight, her head held high, leaving the world of the invisible behind for good. The office was an oasis of quiet luxury hidden behind a nondescript door at the back of the market. Dark wood, supple leather chairs, a single exquisite piece of celadon pottery on a minimalist desk. The air smelled of expensive tea and power. Kwon Ji-hoon sat behind the desk, his jacket off, revealing a crisp white shirt. He gestured to the chair opposite him. Zola sat, her back straight, her hands resting calmly in her lap. He studied her for a long time, his obsidian eyes taking in every detail. "Where," he began, switching to English, the language a neutral ground, "did a woman working at a banchan stall learn to speak like a Busan Jopak elder?" "From one," Zola answered, her voice even. "My foster father. He called himself Uncle Kim." Ji-hoon's expression didn't change, but a flicker of something, recognition, understanding, passed through his eyes. "Kim Dong-hyun, the tiger of Nampo-dong, he died 5 years ago." "Yes. He was old school, honorable in his way. He owed my family a debt from long ago." Ji-hoon leaned forward, the pieces clicking into place. "You are the American girl he took in, the one whose parents died on the road to Gyeonggi." "I am." The silence stretched, filled with the weight of shared, violent history. He knew her world, and she, it was now clear, knew his. "And the lullaby?" he asked, his voice softer. "He sang it to me when I had nightmares," Zola said simply. It was the only gentle thing he knew. Ji-hoon looked away for a moment, a rare crack in his icy facade. He looked at the celadon vase. "It was my grandmother's song." He brought his gaze back to her. "Park Jin-soo is a problem. He is a loud, stupid, greedy child who has been allowed to run wild for too long. His ventures are becoming a liability. They draw the wrong kind of attention to my businesses." "I gathered as much," Zola said. "He will not let today's humiliation stand," Ji-hoon stated as a fact. "He will try to hurt you. He will try to destroy you. He will use his father's money and influence to do it." "I am aware." He leaned back, steepling his fingers. "You are no longer a stall girl. As of this moment, you work for me. I will provide you with a place to live, security, and a salary that will make your previous earnings seem like a rounding error. Your problem with Park Jin-soo is now my problem." Zola met his gaze without flinching. This was the offer, the rescue. But the JSON of her life had a different clause. She was not a damsel. She was an asset. And in return, a slow, cold smile touched Ji-hoon's lips. It was a terrifying, beautiful thing. "In return, you will help me solve my Park Jin-soo problem, permanently. You see things other people miss. You understand our world, but you are not of it. You are an outsider on the inside. That makes you uniquely valuable." He paused. "I am offering you a trade, Zolasi, your expertise for my resources. It is not a gift." This she understood. This was a negotiation between equals. "I have a financial obligation, a serious one." "Tell me the number," he said. $200,000 for a family medical emergency." Ji-hoon simply nodded. He slid a checkbook across the desk along with a pen. "Consider it a signing bonus. The funds will be wired to any account you choose within the hour." Zola looked at the checkbook, at the pen. It was the solution to everything, the end of the crushing weight, the constant fear. But she didn't pick it up. Not yet. "My family cannot be leverage," she said, her voice hard as diamond. "If he touches them, this is not a business arrangement. It becomes personal." Ji-hoon's gaze was steady. "Anyone who is under my protection is untouchable. That now includes your family. I give you my word." In his world, that was a bond stronger than any contract. Zola finally picked up the pen. Her hand was perfectly steady as she wrote down the account details for the hospital in America. She pushed it back across the desk. "Then we have a deal, Kwon-si," she said. "Call me Ji-hoon," he corrected quietly. "Zola," she replied. The war had begun. Zola was installed in a sleek minimalist apartment in a high-security building that overlooked the Han River. The first thing she did was call her grandmother. The relief in her grandmother's voice when she heard the clinical trial was fully funded and back on track was a balm on Zola's burned arm and bruised soul. For the first time in years, Zola could breathe. But safety was temporary. Ji-hoon was right. Park Jin-soo would not stay quiet. Zola knew his type. His ego was a fragile, cavernous thing. Her public humiliation of him had created a vacuum that only revenge could fill. Zola didn't wait for the attack. She began her own offensive. Ji-hoon gave her an office, a computer, and access to his organization's vast information network. He expected her to find a weakness. He didn't realize she was a weapon. Uncle Kim had taught her more than lullabies and street slang. He had taught her how to read the hidden ledgers of a criminal enterprise. He'd shown her how smugglers use legitimate businesses as cover, how money was washed through layers of seemingly innocent transactions. Zola spent 3 days doing nothing but diving into the financial records of the Guangzhou market and its parent company owned by Park Jin-soo's father. To an outside auditor, it would look clean. But Zola wasn't an auditor. She was looking for the ghost signature of a crime. She found it in the import-export logs for a high-end seafood supplier linked to the market, specifically in shipments of frozen sea squirt from Japan. The weight declarations were consistently, almost comically, inflated. Tonnes of product that didn't exist, paid for with real money that was disappearing into an offshore account. It was a classic smuggling over invoice scheme. But what were they smuggling? This was a question Ji-hoon's network couldn't answer. They could track money and muscle, but this was more subtle. This required hands-on intelligence. This required a solo operation. That night, Zola became a ghost again. Dressed in the dark, nondescript uniform of the market's overnight cleaning crew, a simple baseball cap pulled low over her braided hair, she slipped back into the world she had just left. The market after hours was a different creature, silent, cavernous, filled with shadows. She knew the security camera blind spots from her 2 years of observation. She knew the overnight guards' patrol schedule, their preferred spots for a cigarette break. Uncle Kim's lessons echoed in her mind. The best security system's biggest weakness is always the people who run it. She made her way to the central administrative office. The lock on the door, a cheap, pathetic thing she bypassed in under 30 seconds, with a set of pics she had owned since she was 16. Inside, she moved with silent purpose to Park Jin-soo's desk. His computer was password protected, but men like Jin-soo were arrogant and lazy. His password, she guessed correctly on the second try, was the model number of his favorite sports car. The files were a mess, but she found what she was looking for in a hidden folder labeled Hobbies. It wasn't drugs or weapons. It was far more dangerous to a man like Kwon Ji-hoon, who prized a veneer of legitimacy. Park Jin-soo was trafficking priceless Korean artifacts, Goryeo dynasty ceramics, Joseon-era paintings, stolen from temples and private collections, to wealthy, unscrupulous Japanese collectors. He was using the sea squirt shipments to smuggle them out, hidden in custom-built, cryogenic containers. He wasn't just a bully. He was a thief of his own country's heritage, a crime that would bring the full, unforgiving weight of the national authorities down on the entire market operation if it were ever discovered. He was threatening to burn down the whole forest to cover his tracks. Zola downloaded everything onto a tiny, encrypted drive. As she was about to leave, she saw a piece of paper on the desk. It was a printout. A patient profile from a hospital in Alabama. Her grandmother's face smiled up at her from the page. A cold dread washed over her. He knew. He had been digging. This was his next move. She took the paper and slipped out of the office, melting back into the shadows. The game had just escalated. The next morning, she was in Ji-hoon's office, the encrypted drive on the desk between them. "He's trafficking cultural artifacts," she said, her voice clipped and professional. "Using a seafood import business as cover. He's sloppy, but he's moving millions of dollars in stolen national treasures. If the authorities get wind of this, they won't just take him down. They'll tear apart the entire market structure to find out who else was involved. Your operations will be exposed to a level of scrutiny you can't afford." Ji-hoon listened, his expression unreadable. He looked at the data she'd pulled. "This is comprehensive. He also has information on my grandmother," Zola added, her voice dropping, the professional mask cracking for a second to reveal the cold fury beneath. "He's planning to use her as leverage." Ji-hoon's jaw tightened. "He won't get the chance. I'll have him picked up. A car accident. A fishing trip he doesn't return from. Clean. Simple. It was the Jopak solution, the one Uncle Kim would have chosen." "No," Zola said, her voice sharp. Ji-hoon looked at her, his eyebrows raising a fraction of an inch. "No one told him no. If you make him disappear, his father remains," Zola argued, standing up and pacing the office, her mind alight with strategy. "Park Sr. is either complicit or incompetent. Either way, the rot remains. Another Jin-soo will pop up in his place. You don't just want to remove the tumor, you need to irradiate the whole area so it can't grow back. You need to destroy the Park family's reputation and financial standing so completely that they are no longer a factor. Ever." "And how do you propose we do that?" he asked, a genuine question. He was testing her. "We don't make him disappear," Zola said, her eyes gleaming. "We make him famous. His father is hosting a 50th anniversary celebration for the market in 2 weeks. A huge media event. Jinsu will be on stage making a speech. That's our stage." She laid out her plan. A public crucifixion. Use the evidence she'd gathered, the ledgers, the photos of the artifacts, recordings of his deals she'd found on his computer, and broadcast it for the entire world to see. Ji-hoon was silent for a full minute, his eyes tracking her as she paced. He was assessing not just the plan, but the woman who had conceived it. Her plan was more elegant, more permanent, and infinitely more cruel than his own. It was the difference between a club and a scalpel. "This is a high-risk strategy," he said finally. "If it fails, the blowback will be severe." "It won't fail," Zola stated, her confidence absolute. "Because he's arrogant. He won't see it coming, especially not from me. To him, I'm still just the stall girl." A rare, dangerous smile touched Ji-hoon's lips. "Very well," he said. "We do it your way." He was deferring to her judgment. It was a bigger concession of power than any check he could write. The next 2 weeks were a blur of cold, calculated preparation. But Park Jin-soo was a cornered rat, and cornered rats get desperate. He couldn't touch Zola directly. She was now surrounded by Ji-hoon's invisible shield of protection. He couldn't touch her grandmother. The hospital finances were now under Ji-hoon's control. So he decided to attack the source of his problem. Kwon Ji-hoon himself. He arranged a truce meeting, a supposed apology, at a neutral ground restaurant. Ji-hoon, knowing it was a trap, agreed to go. "It is better to face the snake you can see," he told Zola. He went with his standard security detail, confident in their ability to handle any overt threat. But Zola wasn't confident. She had analyzed Jinsu's profile. He was a coward, but he was also a narcissist who watched too many movies. He wouldn't go for a simple gunfight. He would go for something dramatic, something from a distance. While Ji-hoon was at the meeting, Zola was in a van half a block away with a signals intelligence expert from Ji-hoon's team. She wasn't watching the restaurant entrance. She was scanning the rooftops of the surrounding buildings with a pair of high-powered, thermally scoped binoculars. "He's posturing," the expert said, monitoring the audio feed from the restaurant. "Apologizing. Ji-hoon isn't buying it." "Keep listening," Zola said, her eyes sweeping the dark rooftops. "He'll want to hear it when it happens." And then she saw it. A tiny flicker of movement, a brief, unnatural glint of light from a window 4 stories up, across the street. Not a reflection, a lens, a sniper, a professional outside hire. Someone Ji-hoon's men, focused on the immediate perimeter, had missed. "Sniper!" she snapped into her comms unit, her voice ice cold and commanding. "Rooftop, building across the street, 4th floor, east window. Ji-hoon is in the crosshairs right now." There was no time for his security to react, no time to extract him. Zola was out of the van before the expert could even respond. She burst through the restaurant's front doors. The scene was calm. Ji-hoon was sitting at a table, his back to the large window overlooking the street. Park Jin-soo was opposite him, a smug, expectant look on his face. Zola didn't shout. She didn't hesitate. She ran. In a move of pure, explosive athleticism, she crossed the room and launched herself at Kwon Ji-hoon, tackling him out of his chair and onto the floor just as the sound of a silenced gunshot was followed by the explosive shattering of the plate glass window. A spiderweb of cracks appeared exactly where Ji-hoon's head had been a second before. Chaos erupted. Ji-hoon's men drew their weapons, surrounding him and Zola on the floor. Park Jin-soo screamed in terror and surprise, diving under the table. Ji-hoon lay on the floor, Zola's body partially shielding his. He looked from the shattered window to her face, inches from his. Her eyes were blazing with fierce protective fire. There was no fear in them, only focus. She had just saved his life. The balance of their alliance, their partnership, had just been irrevocably equalized. He had offered her protection, and she had delivered it back to him in the most visceral way possible. He looked at her, truly looked at her, and for the first time, the cold, calculating crime boss saw not an asset, not an anomaly, but an equal. His men were already moving, one team rushing the sniper's nest, another securing the exits. He pushed himself up, pulling Zola with him. He stood for a moment, his hand on her arm, a silent, profound acknowledgement passing between them. "The risk," he said, his voice a low rumble just for her, just increased. "So did the stakes," she countered, her breathing evening out. "Now it's personal for me, too." His grip on her arm tightened for a barest second. It was the only outward sign of the bond that had just been forged in the crucible of near death. The war wasn't just about business anymore. It was about honor and survival. The night of the Guangzhou market's 50th anniversary gala was a spectacle of light and sound. A massive stage had been erected in the market's central plaza. Politicians, celebrities, and business titans mingled, sipping champagne. The air buzzed with manufactured celebration. For the Park family, it was the pinnacle of their social climbing. For Zola and Ji-hoon, it was an execution ground. Backstage, Park Jin-soo preened in front of a mirror, adjusting the silk lapels of his tuxedo. He was the star of the show, the heir apparent ready to take his bow. He felt invincible. The failed hit on Ji-hoon had been traced to a disposable mercenary who had conveniently disappeared. Jin-soo believed he was untouchable, his involvement safely buried. He had no idea he was a dead man walking. The moment came. His father, beaming with pride, introduced him. "My son, the future of this great market, Park Jin-soo." Jin-soo strode onto the stage to polite applause, a confident smirk plastered on his face. He walked to the podium, basking in the glow of the spotlights. Behind him, 3 massive LED screens glowed with the market's anniversary logo. "Thank you, Father," he began, his voice smooth and practiced. "For 50 years, this market has been a symbol of Korean prosperity, of our culture." He didn't see Zola standing in the wings, a laptop open in front of her. She wore a simple black headset, her expression calm, her eyes cold. Beside her, Ji-hoon stood like a statue, watching the stage. "Now," Zola whispered into her headset. On the 3 giant screens behind Park Jin-soo, the anniversary logo dissolved. It was replaced by the crisp, clear image of a Goryeo-era Celadon vase, a stolen national treasure. Then came another image, a bank statement from an offshore account, showing a deposit of millions of dollars. Then, a grainy security photo of Jin-soo himself, personally overseeing the loading of a cryogenic container into a truck. A confused murmur rippled through the crowd. Jin-soo, blinded by the spotlights, hadn't noticed yet. He droned on about tradition and honor. Then, the audio kicked in, his own voice tinny and arrogant, from a recorded phone call Zola had uncovered. "Of course it's risky, but the Japanese collector is paying a premium. They're idiots. They'll never trace it back to me." The crowd fell silent. The shock was palpable. Jin-soo finally faltered, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. He glanced behind him. He saw the images. He saw the evidence of his crimes, broadcast for the entire nation's elite to see. His face went from smug to confused to utterly horrifyingly pale in the space of 5 seconds. He stared at the screens, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. And then, Zola walked onto the stage. She was not the stall girl. She was not the cleaning lady. She was a vision of power. She wore an impeccably tailored, single-breasted black suit that mirrored Ji-hoon's own aesthetic. Her hair was styled in a sleek, elegant updo. Her walk was not a swagger. It was a glide, deliberate and absolute. She carried nothing but a wireless microphone. She stopped a few feet from him. The spotlights found her, illuminating her as his equal on the stage. The crowd let out a collective gasp. Jin-soo stared at her, his mind unable to process the transformation. The woman he had scalded, the woman he had tried to crush, was standing before him, the architect of his ruin. "You," he whispered, the single word a croak of disbelief. "Me," Zola said, her voice calm and clear, broadcast across the silent plaza. Desperation and rage contorted his features. The civilized mask was gone, ripped away to reveal the feral animal beneath. With a guttural roar, he lunged at her. Zola didn't flinch. She didn't retreat. As he came at her, she moved with a fluid, brutal economy. It was a move Uncle Kim had taught her for dealing with undisciplined attackers. She used his own momentum against him, sidestepping, grabbing his extended arm, twisting, and dropping her weight. There was a sickening pop as his shoulder dislocated. His scream of pain was cut short as he crashed to the stage floor, a crumpled, pathetic heap. It wasn't a fight. It was a dismissal, a statement of competence so total, it was breathtaking. She stood over him, the microphone held loosely in her hand. He writhed on the floor, clutching his useless arm, tears of pain and humiliation streaming down his face. "Please," he sobbed, looking up at her. "Please, I'll give you anything. Money. Anything." Zola looked down at him, her expression not of anger, but of something far colder, finality. "You asked me once if I knew who you were," she said, her voice carrying to every corner of the plaza. The silence was absolute. The real question was, did you know who I was? She let the question hang in the air for a beat. "Just a stall girl with good hearing." She dropped the microphone. It clattered on the stage, the sound echoing like a gunshot. As if on cue, uniformed officers began to move through the stunned crowd. They were not the cavalry. They were the cleanup crew. The battle was over. Justice had been delivered, not by a court or a committee, but by the woman who had been its victim. Zola turned her back on the wreckage of Park Jin-soo's life and walked off the stage, disappearing into the wings where Ji-hoon was waiting. He said nothing. He simply looked at her, and in his eyes was a universe of respect. He held out his hand. Not to help her, but as an equal, she took it. 6 months later. The boardroom was on the 40th floor, with a view of Seoul that seemed to stretch to the edge of the world. Zola stood before a holographic map, pointing to shipping routes between Incheon and Rotterdam. By restructuring the logistics through the subsidiary in Singapore, we bypassed the tariffs and cut down on customs delays by an average of 72 hours, she explained, her voice confident, authoritative. It also gives us a more stable base for our expansion into the European market. She was no longer wearing a suit of armor. Today it was a chic, elegant dress, the kind of thing she used to see in magazines and think of as belonging to another species of human. The men around the table, Ji-hoon's formidable lieutenants, listened with rapt attention. They were no longer wary of the outsider. She had earned her place. She was a strategist, the head of their entire global logistics division, and she was making them all more powerful, more legitimate, and more profitable than they had ever been. Later that day, she sat in her own office, larger than Ji-hoon's back at the market, on a video call. On the screen, her grandmother laughed, her face fuller, her eyes bright with life. She was sitting in a garden, the Alabama sun warming her face. "The doctors say they've never seen a response like it," her grandmother said, her voice strong. "They're calling me their little miracle." "You were always a miracle, Grandma," Zola said, a genuine warm smile lighting up her face. "I'm just glad the world is catching up." That evening, she stood on the private balcony of Ji-hoon's penthouse apartment, looking out at the city lights twinkling like a fallen constellation. The air was cool, clean. He came to stand beside her, a space of respectful silence between them. He handed her a steaming cup of barley tea. They stood for a long time, simply watching the city breathe. The war was over. The victory was total. The Park family was ruined, their assets absorbed or dissolved, their name a synonym for disgrace. "Uncle Kim would be proud," Ji-hoon said quietly, not looking at her, but at the city. "He always wanted a successor. He just never realized he already had one." Zola turned her head to look at him. His profile was sharp against the city lights, the mask of the crime boss firmly in place. But his eyes, when they met hers, held a rare, unguarded warmth. It wasn't love in the traditional sense. It was something deeper, more profound. It was recognition, the absolute, unequivocal seeing of another person's soul. In his gaze, she was not an employee, not an asset, not a project. She was Zola, the girl who sang lullabies to lost boys, the woman who toppled kings. She took a sip of her tea. The warmth spread through her. This was belonging. Not a place, not a job title, but this. Being fully known and fully valued. It was a safe harbor after a long, long storm. She was finally home. What would you have done? If you enjoyed this story of justice and reversal, please like and subscribe for more.